Hi, I'm back again. I'm not going to usually do this every day. It seems a bit excessive, obsessive, maybe both. But I'm feeling on the roll today. I'm feeling like getting some stuff done. I had some ideas where to take this, so we're going to go ahead and do another video today. This is day 2. If you missed it, the first day was setting up this Laravel app. We talked about some technical architecture decisions. We talked about planning, how to use Claude and Gemini to really establish your technical architecture before you started the development process and to leverage it in order to create that documentation so we could have an Arc42. But before we start, I noticed I've got this screen share tool that I'm paying for that I've never used before. One of the downsides of this tool is it was covering up the chat prompts, which is not ideal. Usually in my day-to-day, I'll leverage Claude's extension in VS Code, but because it was being covered up by me, and I want you to see that I'm a person, so I don't really want to hide me. Today we're going to use the desktop Claude. Claude, when you set it up, you can download it. I'm on Mac. You could download it from the App Store and log in, and it'll work that way. Yesterday in work, it looks like we used Sonnet for 0.8 thousand tokens, Haiku for 14.7 tokens. The limit for a daily use is 200,000. So we were under budget, but if you start getting into this and you're doing multiple hours of development and doing this process, you want to make sure to get the most out of your tokens. Opus is the gold star right now for the best technical solutions. But if you only use Opus, you're going to blow out your token budget in no time at all. That's why most of my work that I was doing yesterday was actually in Sonnet. When you're working on these models, you can select them. Like this one, I can actually do that. If you do work with GitHub Copilot, Copilot tries to automatically select your models for you, which is nice. So if it's a more complex, complicated problem, then it can go in and do that on your behalf and select what model it feels is most appropriate. Claude does not do that out of the box. It's good to keep an eye on those things. We don't want to blow out our budget and not be able to dev. Or if we do dev, we want to set it up so that all the big technical structure and the infrastructure are actually handled before we get into our custom development. And when you get into line by line development and you're ideating on how you're going to solve a solution, you don't necessarily need AI to do that for you. It's this big structure work that is the most benefit for speeding up your process. So that's how we're going to leverage it. So yesterday we did our structure. We're building a Laravel app. We're using a lot of fancy buzz terms. If you want to see the entirety of it, we can look at the README and just read it. But right now we're using a Laravel app that's built with Livewire to make it responsive and workable. We're using reverb sockets with caching, and that works well with Livewire. We're using some Tailwind CSS, a SQL MariaDB database, and we're using PHP and Node to tie it all together. So that is how we've structured this. Okay, stepwise. We have our architecture, and the architecture is very important. Also important is our planning for design. Now, I know design for a lot of devs feels like a dirty word. I have some training in design, but my design is nowhere near what some of these experts. So I work at a marketing agency, and we have UX design teams that are phenomenal, and they are iterative and they work in a very effective way to get some designs together. But we're not going to have a design asset for this. We're going to use Gemini to try to give us some ideas, to try to get some concepts, and we can use those in Claude to build our front end structure. So I'm thinking right now we're using Tailwind CSS, which is fine, but I want to set up some kind of a SaaS system. But before we can set up any of that front end infrastructure, which we want to do in advance of development, because we don't want to skip it and then have things get stylized properly later on. We want to have a design out up front that we can say, okay, here's my colors, here's my structure, here's how I'm going to build this from page to page and extend it. And that we could just do a hello world, but a hello world isn't going to get us what we need long term. We want to have an actual plan, we want to have an actual design, and we want that design to be implemented in an effective manner. So we are going to start there, and to get us going, and I have no ideas right now for how this is going to look, just very vague thought process. I'm going to use Gemini. If you want, you can use Claude for this. There's other tools you could use for this, but I like Gemini. Gemini is pretty good. They have a Nana Banana image generator that is very effective. I can talk with it about, I have some of my existing contexts that I've already gotten here, but for the sake of getting exposure, I'm going to just start vanilla and see what we can get out of Gemini. So for a prompt, and today I'll just use the microphone, because I said that's cool and effective, but we didn't actually do that yesterday. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm building this Street Bites app. I want the app to be modern, mobile first, ADA compliant. I'm looking for a design concept, and I'm looking for color scheme so that we can implement it at a technical level. So let's give it a try and see how I do. Hey, I'm looking to create a design scheme for a front-end dev project that I'm working on called Street Bites. It needs to be mobile first, responsive, ADA compliant. I'm looking for a modern look and feel, and I just need some basic design concept, maybe a color scheme, and something that we can establish in code. So it's thinking urban vibrant, large bold heads like street signage, color palette ADA compliant, color primary, color accent mustard, color blah 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 blah. Single page app framework, or keeping it light and traditional semantic markup architecture. Before we get into the way that it's built, can you get me a screenshot of potential look and feels in the mobile environment that we can use along with the colors that you've given us to establish a working model? So this is Nano Banana, not Nana Banana. Nano Banana is nested under the Google umbrella, and it's going to create us an image. So this image could be immediately used as a rough pitch. This is AI generated, so you need to make sure to put that out in front of anything and say, this is what we've got on an AI generated front. And it's not polished. And AI is good at a lot of things, but like I said last time, it's basically copying things that it knows. So if everyone used AI for all of their UX, UI design, everything would look the same. It would be homogenized. There's no creativity anymore. But because this is just a profile we're looking at window dressing over the actual meat and potatoes, which is going to be our code. This is probably enough for us to get started. We can add this into our documentation. We can add some of this context just for a forward movement. So let's take this. Let's see. Can you generate me a markdown file with the styles and the color foundations and the color palette, the design concept, so that I can drop it into a repo for later reference? So while it's building that, I'm going to download this image, and we can use this image as a reference point for later, so that when we want to introduce a logo, when we want to introduce the other things that we would need in our regular development, we need to actually have some context. We can drop this in and say, hey, use this as a jumping off point. So it has generated a file. Okay. So we're going to take this, download it, make sure that it opens. So I'm going to drop that into my docs and architecture along with this Gemini code. Will go in my docs and architecture for future reference. We're also going to take this and use it with Claude to implement on the new site. Okay, so there's my markdown file, so that is in my repo. So now that my file is in the directory, I can go back to Claude and I can reference it. I'm going to use Opus just for fun. So we have a new style guide that was added for this project. I would like to leverage the style guide to create a CSS driven development with some kind of, we use gulp a lot, PMNP or PMPN or whatever it is, another that we use. I've used Webpack. Anything, they change every 6 months, it feels like, or whatever system was already placed in the project. All right, so we have a new style guide that was added. I would like to leverage the style guide to create a CSS driven development with some kind of PN or whatever system was already placed in the project to build and compile the CSS. Because I'm working out of that, I am going to drop the file path just to make sure that it's actually finding it quickly. We don't want it to have to search for it. We want to give it all of that direction up front. Let's expand this a little bit. So I reviewed the style guide and existing build steps. Here's the current state. Uses Vite plus npm with Laravel Vite plugins, which is fine. Tailwind CSS, which is under resources, CSS, app CSS. Okay, that checks out. There's no SCSS or SAS anywhere. Pure CSS custom properties for urban vibrant design system, colors, typography, style, APA. Vite compiles Sass natively once a Sass package is installed, so wiring it to the existing NPM pipeline is straightforward. How CSS should relate to the existing Tailwind setup. Oh, I have to talk. What would you recommend? I haven't worked extensively with Tailwind. Is this something that we should build in a different language? No, that sounds wrong. Is this something that we should leverage the existing Tailwind? I might need a little context in how that is established and set up. Can we add, can you set the front-end design standards in a way that works with Tailwind? I don't want to remove Tailwind if it is an effective solution for this project build. So Tailwind is wired through Vite in the Tailwind's Vite plugin. That's a single entry file as resources apt CSS. So that's what we saw here. Theme block is design system configuration. Anything you define there sets real CSS properties. Tailwind auto generates utility classes. So if I add a color, I automatically get it with no config files. They don't get along. So, hooray, we're going to try something that Tony's never done before. I've never worked in Tailwind. Front-end design standard that works with Tailwind is encode the style guide as Tailwind theme tokens. You get utility classes, CSS variables, and style guide specifics from one source of truth, which would be in Tailwind. Yes. Please set up the theme for us with the standards similar to what is in the style guide. GitHub. It looks like Tailwind CSS is a library that's being brought into the CSS and compiled. That's why we're referencing this blade.php. I don't have much familiarity with blade.php. But when we set these from the style guide, it's going to build them into a base CSS, which is a very familiar structure for anyone that's done CSS. It's going to set my fonts. It's going to set my theme to give me colors. It's going to set my color palette. I probably need to get an extension to display this better. This looks a little bit weird, but VS Code will give me a Tailwind extension. WCAG 2.1. That's what we want. WCAG 2.1 AAA. It's good. Let's remove, I don't need a reference to this temporary file. Let's see what Claude has to say. Yeah, you can do it. So it's going to run a build for me. Once we've set this up, we need to set up some, linters. We have to set up some PHP stand, PHPCS for our PHP standards. Maybe there's a linter specifically for Tailwind. I'm not sure. We'll have to look. I don't know that ESLint will quite cut it when it comes to our CSS styles, but we'll see what we've got out there. I'll ask. Build succeeded. Verify tokens and compiled. So it's just going to see that once it compiled, it actually set up where it should. So Tailwind looks like you build similar to Vue, where we would set styles in these components, and those components will be inherited based on how we build our front end structure. So that makes logical sense. So this is our HTML structure. For Blade is new to me too, so we're going to have to figure this thing out. That's interesting. So, live demo without breaking it. This is the Laravel starter page for Welcome Blade. Created 4 files. We saw those. They're all updating and merging into app. So they've added them as imports. And then they've added the web PHP style guide. Looks like it updated my temporary file, which is fine. We're going to get rid of that file. Maybe I'll overwrite the one that I've got in the documentation with its updates. It probably makes good sense. Living style guide so you can see it render. Yeah, that's great. So let's look at that. So my local is going to be streetbyteslando.site. So now there should be a style guide. It's not connecting. Let me make sure I have done a Lando start. When you're working with Lando and you shut down your computer, you have to do an entire new stand up every time you start. That's just part of the dev process. There we go. So I took the colors and design from Gemini, pass them into Claude and say, I want to build with this. I wasn't quite sure what we were going to do with it. And Claude was able to take that and build me out a style guide. So based on this, we've got our different levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary buttons with colors. All the colors are inheriting. I've got a truck card that comes with this because of the initial design concept. So if you want to see where that came from, it's inside of this Gemini code. Built out some of that for us. So there's a food truck card, and here's the colors and how that's built. But it's all very ADA compliant. If we want to confirm that it's ADA compliant, we can use a tool called Wave. Google Lighthouse does a lot of this too. I think I'm just old and I like Wave. So Wave is a ADA compliance thing. It has extensions for Chrome, Firefox, Edge. When you are doing a real workable solution that you want to sell, certain things matter. When I worked for a non-for-profit, I worked for the NAIC for a while. You don't need to know specifics, trust me. When you work for a non-for-profit, non-for-profits are constantly dealing with this threat of lawsuit because they're afraid that if they don't meet some ADA compliance guidelines, that's the American Disabilities Act guidelines, that they could be liable to a lawsuit. That means somebody accessing the site has some disability. They can't see colors very well. There's disabilities where you can't deal with things that are hard to read. They move around a lot. And you have things where links that are built need to address ADA compliance by actually having descriptive text called ARIA labels so that a screen reader like Vox, which we'll talk about Vox later, can actually go in and go through the page and allow you to navigate. You have to be able to navigate with a keyboard. All those are things that we can build into a web app pretty effectively, but building them into iOS and Android App Store is more difficult. It can be done, but that's part of why we're doing this in a web app method, so that when we're presenting this as a profile, we can say, look, it's 100% ADA compliant, Section 508, which is the Disabilities Act section that requires this, WCAG 2.1 AA, which is the accessibility guidelines. So let me turn on Wave and you can see it. So Wave is the accessibility evaluation tool. So this is a nice tool for evaluating a live website, or in this case, my local. We can see what it's flagging for us. So this is saying that this heading is not set as a heading. That's okay. This is just our style guide. We're not going to get too crazy on it, but what I'm looking for is these colors. So if there was an issue with color contrast, that would also be highlighted in this tool. When we're using proper development processes, things like this should be taken into account. If I had issues where my text was considered not legible, say these small bits of text were not coming back as a readable font, that would be flagged in here. And that's what I'm looking for out of this particular page. I want to make sure that our colors are actually meeting ADA requirements. I want to make sure that our buttons have readable text and that everything's working the way that it should. And so this is building from our base theme. All right, so we have a style guide. Time to totally bail on that and work on something else. But the style guide is there. It has all of the things we need. We've gone through some basic design with Gemini, and that's great. Other things that we need to do. So let's just ask Claude, this is great. Is this going to build when we run what command are we going to run to build this for production? Is that a pretty straightforward? Can you also outline how the JavaScript is compiled? We are looking for some kind of linters and checking against CSS changes in a linter. Okay, we took a short break. We let Claude do its thing. So let's see where we're at. This was our prompt. We're looking for what JavaScript compile looks like. We're looking for what kind of linters we can use against it. Linting should always be something you think of up front, not after development start so you can maintain standards. So it looks like to build in production is just going to be npm run build, which is extremely useful. It explains how this compiles. I did look through this a little bit. It also includes some cache busting logic, which is fantastic and necessary. But looking at this a little bit more, these theme things are set into tokens that are then inherited. So if you go to the app CS, it inherits and joins all of these together and then places them in the site. Actually, there's a component structure built into this where it'll include, right now I have a card and a button. So if you were to look at the style guide, is actually in this style guide page, and you can see that it makes very logical sense in how they frame it. There's some nice things that's done up front, including setting us into a CSS grid. It has some logic. This is built in from our build process, but you can see it does a nice job of setting those styles for us, and we're probably going to lean on that a little bit moving forward. We want to make sure that everything that we build is built into a separate component, and there's things you can do to make that more efficient, especially when you're dealing with JavaScript. So we've set that up, and it looks like the same pipeline that's used to build is going to pull everything together and make everything work, which is fine. I also asked it about a CSS linter, which it did install. It set me up with some style lint. We can customize our rules and whatever we want to do here. I think that's a little bit excessive for just the portfolio. I think we're going to go basically with the generic rules. And it ran it and made some fixes for us. Style lint ran. It's given me some small things like some hex changes and little bits and bobs. And then it's talking about, I asked about a JS linter. It wants to set up ESLint. So I think yeah. So among the things it's going to do, and this is important, part of why I like VS Code is when you're making changes into the Git repository. When you are making changes, it'll outline the changes and color code them. So it'll say, okay, I've introduced these new files into the code base ahead of this change. It can give you a lot more context as to what happened so that nothing's lost. Some of this AI related development, because it's using its own motivation and it's doing it on its own, and we want to make sure it doesn't introduce anything strange into our code. That's where this kind of granular review is necessary. In this case, U is basically a new file, and then M is a modified and existing file. So here's where it added my style lint and set some standards. This is the regular style lint standard that's coming from the linter. So nothing's being controlled locally, which is good. But getting that level of granular review is something that you should regularly do. This file is going to go away. I actually dropped it into our documentation, so I'm going to just remove that from our repo. So everything looks good. I want to set up a pre-commit hook. So when you're using Git, you can say, hey, before I actually commit these changes, I want to force them to go through these linters. And a linter is just a way of checking that your code meets standards, and you would set those standards. So we're using style lint for our CSS linter. We probably should do ESLint for JavaScript. And of course, we don't have much JavaScript to lint right now, but if we set it up front, that'll make it easier for us to troubleshoot in the future. So we're going to go ahead and say, yes, please set up a JS linter. ESLint and prettier are fine. While we are at it, what I want to set up PHP stan and PHPCS as well. I want them all to be executed on a pre-commit hook. Is there anything else you would suggest for this Laravel, I spelled it wrong, driven development? Typing anyway, it's going to go out and get me a new linter, which is probably going to install with npm, and then it's going to look for PHP stan, PHPCS equivalents. Those are for checking our backend code. So we want to set this up so that all the front end and all the back end are tracked and regularly set against a linter. And the earlier you do this in the process, the better off you'll be long term. Additional things we do for my client. So it uses Laravel Pint for PHP code standards, which is good. So it's already set that up. But along with, we'll just use Pint then. So along with our linters, my client right now is using CodeRabbit. CodeRabbit is a way of checking your code standards against AI, and AI will recommend changes to your code. We like CodeRabbit. We use it a lot. From my understanding, it's a pretty expensive tool. There's also GitHub has settings to set it as an approver. We'll look into that. I don't think my GitHub Copilot is active. I think I disabled that and changed it to Claude. So we might see if Claude has some equivalent. I think introducing something AI driven to help us suggest code standards and things outside of just the linter is a pretty good process. And the nice thing about introducing this so that AI can check itself is it's fairly hands-off. So it's going to run. It's going to get some composer. Okay, so we've run our prompt. So what it's done is it's set up ESLint and prettier for JavaScript linting, which is good. It has set up the Laristan, which is Laravel PHP standards. It's gone through and tested all of them. It set the pre-commit hook to make it executable, which is a necessary step because when we trigger a shell or anything like that, it has to be executed in the terminal. So everything came back clean, which is good. We've got ESLint set up. This ESLint config, we can set our own standards. Prettier RC JSON is set up. Same thing. It's set up Laristan for Laravel with PHP Neon, so that's going to set our look and feel for PHP. And then it's setting up a pre-commit hook to run all of those, and it should do it on Git hooks, which is already set up on the machine, which is good. Each new clone must run git config core hooks git hooks once. Okay. Other things it's going to try to do right now. I don't really want to set up GitHub Actions. I want that to be a whole separate video around our deploy process. So we're going to wait on that. PHP stand baseline is good. We're going to go ahead and do that. Reactor, Laravel, automated refactors and framework upgrade rules with Pint. Sure, we can do that too. And Pest, which is with PHPUnit for PHPUnit testing. Unit testing's the big buzzword right now. It's basically testing that functions continue to work as expected as code changes are being made. Let's skip the CI pipeline GitHub actions for now. I'm going to focus on that in the future. We should set up a PHP stand baseline. Reactor sounds like a good idea. Let's set up Pest. I haven't done that before. And it is a good test case. We're going to give it all of that. One thing before I execute, because we're doing a lot of heavy stuff, I'm just going to check my usage. Okay, so we've got a lot more in the current session. I've got 3 hours until that clears. I'm only at 16%. Oop. I'm using a heavy model, so this is going to accrue much quicker with Opus, but because I'm dealing with some highly technical bits and bobs, I want that to be addressed with a better quality model. So let's go ahead and do that. So if you don't have context, I have lots of practice working in these types of tools. If you don't have context and you need more planning than just, hey, go ahead and do it because you don't know what it's trying to tell you, you can absolutely change this from edits to plan, and you can have it explain what each of these things is before you install it. Because this is like every project you work on has similar framework in how we set these things up, I have a lot of context already, which is why I'm just letting it move ahead and reviewing it in my GitHub diff, or in my Git diff. Okay, so it's still running, but while it's doing this, I wanted to give you some AI context. So it can get lost in the weeds, all the changes that are being made. If you want to see exactly what it's doing in real time, you can look at these. So they have all of these are expandable. One thing that it did here is set up a unit test for me. It's set up some style guide testing also, just to see that this actually loads properly. It's created in the composer, it added these requirements to composer so that when it does a run build and then it'll work. I'm going to allow Claude to verify Pest Reactor, and it, yes. Another piece of context while it's spinning. In your repo, we have this git clod.claude. These are the settings that you've allowed it. So if you're doing what I'm doing and just don't want to have to revisit it every 2 seconds to say, hey, do you need me to tell you it's okay to do this? It'll add them to this local.json and say, hey, git, or when you do run Claude, go ahead and allow yourself to do these things. It's good to have this in your mind. That way, when you get to a point where you're ready to productionalize this, you can remove these automated accesses. The idea is we don't want something in production to somehow get messed up because Claude has the free will to do whatever it wants to do. So it ran pint, and in pint it is checking that everything is working in our PHP test, which is good. It set up a PHP stand baseline, which is setting our standards that we're willing to allow, and we can adjust that. That's inside of the PHP baseline neon, which we'll go through when we look at deploying this or pushing up the repo. It is refactoring with Reactor. It's set in Composer, and these are the new commands. So it has a PHP to execute Pest. I don't love that. I want Pest to be available inside of a tool in Lando. Let's go ahead and run the Composer reactor. That's what it's asking me. If we want to apply the changes that it found so that the skeleton files are up to date. In addition, I'd like to add Pest as a Lando tool. Can you do that as well? It's not in your best interest to continue to use Lando PHP because of how the way the tooling works in Lando. You want everything to have its own kind of standalone structure, so they're compartmentalized. And you can control things like versions, and you can control how and when and why it's executed. So if I go to the Lando.yaml, so services are what's built into Docker. Tooling is what we use on a regular basis. So you can set additional rules in this to say, okay, I want this to execute this specific command in this specific way. And when you're dealing with this kind of work at scale, and you're dealing with lots of different developers potentially touching the code, which we should always assume at some point we're going to expand this to a wider team. So it added to my Lando, that's what you saw here, that's this Pest. It did a Composer reactor, which updated some files for me to make them more in alignment with the requirements from Reactor, which is one of our testing linters. It ran a pint to reconcile so that Reactor and pint are sending us back. Pint is the Laravel linter that it said we installed for PHP, and PHP stan is our regular PHP standards, which is a global thing. No Lando rebuild needed. Lando Pest runs in the suite. Reactor left channels and tests. So when you commit, you'll see those in diff along with the files we worked on, all intentional. Everything's ready for you to review. Okay. So let's review. We set up our theme using Gemini to generate a theme that's modern, ADA compliant, and functional. We've implemented that theme using proper compiling. We're not just copying and pasting CSS. It's built the theme, including a style guide, which is pretty nice, and the style guide's functional and working. We have set up our linters. We've set up our PHP stan and other style PHP checkers, which is including Pint. We've built all of those into a pre-commit hook. So a pre-commit hook, well, where'd you put that pre-commit hook? There you are. Git hooks. Yeah, okay. So in our pre-commit hook, when we commit this, it will go through. First, it's going to say, okay, is this pipe going to complete or not? And when something fails, we want it to say no. We're not going to let you commit this. You introduce something that's not up to our standards. When it jumps through that, it's going to execute Lando pint, which is our Laravel PHP checker. PHP stand for Laravel. It's also maintaining PHP standards. ESLint, which is checking our JavaScript to see that is meeting our requirements. StyleLint, which is going to check CSS to see if we've introduced anything that we shouldn't be meeting our standards. And then Prettier likes to keep things looking nice. So if we have weird indentations and if we have weird issues with spacing, or if things aren't set in an alphabetical order, things like that are controlled by Prettier. And then it'll say all checks passed. So let's go ahead and commit that. Before I do that, actually, I want to keep all of this relevant changes in the Claude.md readme.md documents. Can you update those to match the changes we've made today? Can you also add a document to the, what are you called? I'm going to do this every single time. Docs and architecture. I'm saying I want to make sure it explains in detail how our front end framework works. I'd like an additional file to explain in detail how our linting is set up. Okay, so this is an important step. Don't skip it. Adding to the README is good for us to read what changes have been made. The Claude MD gives Claude the correct context so that if you have to ask it, hey, can you do this? Stop. Where are you? Stop. I need to add this. No, I'm just being lazy. Yeah, it didn't know. It was looking for it in the actual code base, and we wanted to update that separate directory. One thing we might do is set up a prompt. Maybe that'll be for next time. So that we can execute a prompt and it'll take all of the context and automatically update the Claude.md, the readme.md, and the documentation. So that way we don't have to add this step. But keeping all of this up to date will keep us honest in the long term. And it'll keep things clean and clear and concise. If we have changes, we can outline them in a change doc. But because we're not expecting any client feedback, right? This is a net new product. It's probably just going to be we're documenting as we go. So it's updated Claude to talk about Pint. It's talking about the linters that we've introduced, pre-commit hook and how that's established, front-end designed, how the CSS is broken down. This is probably more extensive than I would have authored into the claude.md, but it's often a good idea to let it drive its own logic. Similar for the README. Yeah, similar for the README. And it's going to create 2 docs. So we have Tailwind, build pipe, the different commands, CSS architecture, how it works in Tailwind. When we get to a point where this is well documented, we'll probably create a separate agent to check, or so that we don't have to enter a question and have it check against this directory every time. We could say, okay, reference agent, tell me in this docs how this works. And that way we don't have to have it continuously dig through the same code base over and over again, costing us tokens. It can also give us some point of reference when we need it. And it's also setting a docs location for its own sake. Okay, so it's added a claude.md, but I thought I had one. No, it just updated. I don't know why it says it added one. It added to it. See, there you go. README added the Pest 4 tooling, how to use it, created a linting and code quality file and a front-end framework file. Okay. It's asking if we should include those docs in the repo. I don't want to do that right now. We might get into building in Arc42 or something in the future, but right now it is not necessary. Everything is in place and verified. Nothing further needed. Okay, so now we're going to attempt to run a pre-commit hook. So you can see my naming convention. Every time that I'm making a push up to the repo, I like to include these things. This is my build step of create a new branch. That way we can merge them and we can keep the branch with the changes for reference later, or if we have to revert or something. I know they're all kept in commit SHAs and the commit hashes, but I like keeping them in a separate build, in a separate branch. So now that I've got all of my stuff, I'm going to, what is that? Okay. This is our database for caching. Huh. So these are our changes that were introduced using pstan or maybe pint. When it ran, it said that this wasn't meeting its minimum standards and it updated them. I just don't know this. Oh, it must be incremental. Oh, interesting. It's seeding our database for us. I'm not familiar with that. That's cool. Okay, it's probably related to some of the functionality that I just don't have much exposure to. Console, yeah, that's more of the same. It's just including voids in case it doesn't have anything passed in the function. It can return as a strict type. This is my PHP test, my PHPUnit test, although it's using Pest instead of unit. It's just saying that when I get to the home page, is it going to return a 200? And it does. Renders a living style guide. Cool. Okay, I think we're good. I'm going to go ahead and commit this. I'm going to add them all. You could do this with a git add dot, but that's not how I like to do it. I like using VS Code. So I'm going to say establish front end framework and unit and the linters PHP stand. So when this is built right, this commit will actually trigger all of the things in the pre-commit hook, right? So first it's going to say p code style and it's going to run pint. And pint ran clean, no errors. It's going to do the same for each of these. If any of these comes back as broken, then we're going to need to adjust. We passed all checks. This is my comment in the commit. Yeah. And these are the files that were created in the commit. So we're good to go. Let me do a git push. So you can have Claude do this for you. I don't like it. I feel like there's some things that I want to see. In GitHub, in a well thought out and well practiced site, we would have PRs. Those PRs will be reviewed, and when they're reviewed, then they will merge. This is also where we could add like GitHub Copilot as a reviewer. There's other additional restrictions here, but this is just going to give us the overview of all of the changes that were made. And I'm going to go ahead and merge this in, and we'll call this video done. I'll create a PR. There's my commit. There's my files changed. And merge. And we'll get more into GitHub in a future video. If you are following along, the changes I made should be listed here. Establish front-end framework. You'll see them in the Git. We also have that as a separate branch because I did not delete it. So this front-end framework will have specifically all the changes that we made in it. Okay, Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time, sticking with me, and we'll come back around to it later. Take care.